All right, I'm here with Dan Mirvish, who is a co-founder of Slamdance, author of The Cheerful Subversive's Guide to Independent Filmmaking, and the director of 18 and a Half, Bernard and Huey, Between Us, Open House, Omaha the Movie. And your topic today is your up-and-coming film, or I guess a film that you are working on, raising funding for right now,
Hmm.
called Atomic Fondue. So I'm going to set the timer for 20 minutes and we're going to talk atomic fondue. So first off, uh, tell me why you chose this topic.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on, Avi, and hello to everyone out there in Film Stack, NonDē land, wherever you wind up seeing this. So I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, like so many other people. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people did, and grew up at the height of the Cold War. And so one of the weird things when you're in Omaha is that you're like the number two target kind of after Washington in case the Soviets ever sneak attacked the US with a missile. And it's because there's an Air Force base there that was the backup bunker to launch all the command and control center for all of the US nuclear arsenal. And so it was always regarded as like the number one or two target for the Soviets. And so growing up in Omaha, we had this anxiety, this angst. Uh, I mean, a lot of people in the Cold War did, but particularly if you were in Omaha. And then one of the things we also knew about, which not that many other people did, was that there was always a plane flying around the Midwest. Between 1961 and 1990, there was 24/7. There was always a backup command and control plane flying around the Midwest that flew out of the Air Force Base in Omaha, and that was called Operation Looking Glass. And you could look up and see it flying. It wasn't a secret. It was a deterrence to the Soviets during the Cold War. Anyway, so that's why I've always been kind of fascinated with the Cold War, with nuclear annihilation, and maybe a little bit more than other people. And so a friend of mine in Omaha, a guy named Matthias Chesky, I don't know, he started posting something about a Midwest modern house that he saw, and it was close to the Air Force Base, and somehow that got my head spinning, and I came up with an idea. What if you have a plane load of Air Force wives on this Looking Glass plane that that are trying to thwart World War III, but while balancing infidelities, spies, martinis, and fondue. And so hence Atomic Fondue. And so Matthias and I started researching there's a really great Air Force museum called the SAC Museum outside of Omaha that has actually done a reproduction, or not a reproduction, they refurbished one of these planes, and they gave us amazing access to take pictures and videos and interview veterans who served on that plane. And then we teamed up. So we came up with a storyline. We teamed up with our friend Christine Bartugian in New York, who's a great screenwriter. So she worked on the screenplay for a long time, handed it back to me. I've been working on the screenplay, and then teamed up with Kai Swanson, who's a great producer out in North Carolina, who also teaches at Elon University, and they workshopped the script for students. And then my producing partner, Dana Altman, back in Nebraska, he's been involved a little bit. And we came up with this kind of unique project about five wives on this Air Force plane, and 90% of the movie takes place in this self-contained plane, which we're going to actually build our own version of on a stage somewhere. And so yeah, we've done a reading in LA, and I think people are pretty excited about it, and we're all excited about launching it. And we're launching now in January. We're starting the Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, so I mean, I watched Bernard and Huey,
Oh, thank you.
which I like very much.
Thank you very
Uh,
much.
but you know, I mean, you're clearly a champion of doing, I guess, independent film in the last decade plus. This definitely feels like um, a big topic to tackle.
Yeah. Well,
Just
one of the
within the context of the Cold War, really.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I kind of figured out a little bit on 18 and a half, my last film, which was
Yeah.
a Watergate comedy slash thriller slash comedy, depending on if people laughed or not, was what we tackled, excuse me, in that film was this idea of having, the indie rules of having a small number of characters and a small number of locations, self-contained location, but having the stakes sorry, there's something in my throat. But just having the stakes really high, So in that case, it was Watergate and the fate of the country, even though it was essentially, six people in two hotel rooms, that at the heart, that was kind of what that movie was about. And then what we're doing with this one with Atomic Fondue is, also six people on an airplane, but this, and it's very character driven. It's very much about how these characters are interacting with each other. But the overall stakes are the fate of the world, And so, and to me, I think that's kind of, I mean, look, there's a lot of different ways to make an independent movie. This isn't the only formula, but it's a way to sort of magnify the scope of a film without magnifying the scope of the production. So,
Right.
if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, because you're taking a big concept, you're doing something historical, which most people would immediately raise the red flags of production budget, but you're finding ways, creative ways to do that on a low budget. I mean, it's for emerging non-D filmmakers. That's you're ahead of the curve and clearly have figured out how to um
Well, yeah, and I had kind of always shied away from period stuff. And then on Bernard and Huey, which you saw,
yep.
we, about 10% of that movie. I mean, I was very lucky to have this amazing script by Jules Pfeiffer, the living, well, then living legend. And he had written it in 1986, but it was set in, so it was contemporary scenes were set in 1986 with flashbacks to the late 50s. And then he and I kind of adapted it forward 30 years. So contemporary scenes were when we were shooting it in 2017 or something. And then the flashbacks were in 1989. Anyway, so about 10% of the movie were these flashbacks in 1989. And we had the challenge of, well, how do you shoot that in a movie? So we actually used Super 16 on those scenes. And then actually here, which used to be my garage, now we've kind of upgraded it a little bit, but it's still the space that was my garage. We shot, how do you shoot a 1988 New York City subway in a Culver City garage? And we figured that out, and I don't know, you saw those scenes, and we realized, you can be, just with creative and your framing and your sound design and acting and I don't know if you saw it, but I can send you a link to a BTS video we did just on that one scene, how to shoot a subway in a New York City subway in a Culver City garage. Anyway, and so but for me as a filmmaker, that kind of demystified, like, oh, if I can pull that off,
Yeah.
how hard can an airplane be? How hard can Watergate be? And then with 18 and a half, which was largely influenced by conversations with Jules Pfeiffer, that was based on the age-old indie premise. We got a great location. So my friend Terry Keefe owned this motel at the time called the Silver Sands Motel that looked really vintage. And he had intentionally kept the look, to the way it was in the early 70s when his grandparents had built the place. And we wrote the script around that. And then we got a second location, a diner, and that was vintage. And so we're like, well, if the film gods give you one location, you should make a movie. If they give you two locations, you have to make a movie, So in this case with Atomic Fondue, we're actually building out most of the set. But what we found on 18 and a half, just for anyone else thinking of doing a period film, is if your basic locations are period appropriate, that's more than half the battle. Everything else, when it comes to like costume and wardrobe, it's not, there are distinct creative choices you make, but they're not necessarily more expensive. Even
Yeah.
picture cars. We didn't, I don't think we spent a dime on our picture cars for 18 and a half. We just, knew someone who knew someone who had a car, and you would do that even with a contemporary car. So it didn't, we had a talent and we had a very talented crew, but it didn't, I don't think shooting period cost us a dime.
How
Um,
much of this is because you're clearly building a network or have been for some time? I mean, I watched the I guess the Atomic Fondue
oh,
the
the pitch
crowdfunding video.
video. Yeah, yeah, the crowdfunding video,
I
which
mean, you're researching this. You
mhm.
are already working with the composer. You're working with the screenwriter. You've workshopped the script with actors. You've done a table read. You have producers on board. So this is clearly like, um, would you have been able to tackle something like this earlier in your career?
Yeah, probably. I mean, in a weird way, the biggest film I made was my first one, which was Omaha the movie, where we were shooting 35 millimeter film, which was has all kinds of challenges unto itself, in Nebraska, in two big locations that were 400 miles apart. Like we had to travel 400 miles to get from Omaha to Carhenge, where the movie ends, and then back. And then because there was a problem with the film stock, it got stuck in the soup at the lab. We had to go back a second time. So we did 1,600 miles on that movie. So I'm not that much of an idiot to do that again. So no, I've learned from that. Like, no, don't do that. Don't
Yeah.
try to do that. That said, there's a million indie filmmakers making road movies, but that it's not easy, and it's challenging, and it has its own challenges. So in one sense, my films are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. My sets are getting smaller. My number of cast are getting smaller.
And not
Uh,
having to shoot on film is a
yeah. Although
huge,
that
huge
said,
difference.
we may try to do that on Atomic Fondue.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very unique choice right now.
Well, it is in America, but if you look at like all the films that play at the big European festivals, they have a real
Hmm.
predilection towards film shot on film. So it will hope it will if we do it, it'll help our chances of getting into some of those festivals, but also just kind of forward looking a year or two in advance. If you shot, you need to distinguish your film from an AI film, and anything you can do to distinguish your film. One of
Yeah.
the ways to get recognizable actors in a film, because at least not yet, they're not showing up in AI things. Like maybe in 10 years they will.
Yeah.
But the other thing is to shoot on as analog a look as you can get, whether that's shooting digital and doing, using vintage lenses, which is what we did on 18 and a half, to get a real analog look and feel. Or as I say, if you can shoot Super 16 and have the budget to support it, because it's not cheap,
Yeah.
we may try that. So we'll see. Ask me in a year what we actually shot on, and I may, even then I may not tell the truth, but because if people think you shot on Super 16, honestly, that makes as much difference as if you actually shot on Super 16. So movies are magic. So we
Yeah.
we are all magicians one way or another. Um, but anyway, but the point is that what was the point is yeah, don't be afraid to shoot, period. And I know you asked me the question. Could I have,
Yeah.
done this earlier? So I don't know if do you know the analogy about stone soup?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so I think it's an old Jewish story, but it's probably like,
I don't know.
every country has some version of this. The
Yeah.
guy walks into the village, into the shtetl, and he says to and he's not carrying anything. He's just by himself, and he says to everyone in the village, he said, "I'm going to make you guys stone soup," and they're like, "Stone soup? What the hell is stone soup? What are you talking about?" And he picks up a little rock from the ground. He goes, "See this rock? This edible rock? I'm going to make stone soup out of this rock." They're like, "That's crazy talk. You can't make soup out of a rock." And he goes, "No, trust me. Does anyone have a pot?" And someone's like, "Yeah, yeah, here's a pot." And he goes, "All right," I sticks a stone in the pot. Nothing happens. He goes, "No, trust me, we're gonna make stone soup." He said, "We need a little bit of water. Does someone have some water?" "Oh, you got some water?" "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's put some water in the pot." "Okay, cool." You know what? If this still isn't turning into stone soup, You know what would make really good a take on stone soup if someone had a carrot, you know, just add a little bit of flavor. You got a carrot? Oh yeah, yeah, we'll take the carrot. You know what would be even better? Some celery. Oh, you got some celery. Let's stick that in. Let's take a look at this thing. Oh, you know what would be really good stone soup? Does anyone have a chicken? A chicken would be good. Oh, you got a chicken. Great. Let's stick the chicken in. The next thing you know, you've got stone soup. You've got soup made completely out of what started as an inedible little rock. And eventually you got stone soup. And that is what making indie non-D films is all about. You start with a nugget of an idea and you tell everyone, this is the stone, we're going to make soup out of this thing. And then you put it in, and then you get a screenwriter, and then you get a producer, and then you get a composer, and then you do crowdfunding. You get 300 people throwing in spices and carrots and celery, and someone gives you a chicken, you know, and the next thing you know, you got a movie, you know, or stone soup, or you see where this is going.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
so that's what we're all doing here, one way or another, whether we fully understand it or not. It's you don't need connections, you don't need money, you don't need fancy actors until you do. But the
yeah,
point is, you don't hold yourself back. If you've got an idea, if you've got that nugget of a stone, whatever that is, whether it's a script idea or a camera or, you know, or a motel, you know, and that's your stone, you're going to build the soup around that. That's how you make a movie.
yeah, yeah. Well, you're certainly ahead of the curve in navigating this. So I think,
Thank
there's
you.
a lot of folks who are going to learn from your journey. Um, so like with did you know you were going to be crowdfunding Atomic Fondue going into it? Do you think that's
Yeah.
an important
Oh yeah. Yeah.
part
Yeah.
to it?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and part of why I do crowdfunding is not for the funding; it's for the crowd.
Yeah,
I think every film, I mean, or at least every one of my films, I don't want to speak for everyone else, should start with the idea that you're going to get a bunch of people together and communally they're on your team. You know,
yeah,
you're all making this movie. So if you get 100, 200, 300 people that, you know, maybe they put in $1 each, now you've got like a whole army that is supporting you, not just financially, but also just, you know, emotionally, you know, through your journey. But you know, but the trick, at least for me, is I don't pretend to raise the whole budget through Kickstarter. I think with a short film you can do that. With maybe a this is super micro low budget indie, you could probably do that. With the kind of my films, no. If you can raise 10% of the budget on crowdfunding, I think that's great because it's Kickstarter, it's not Kick Finisher. You know, you
right.
shouldn't pretend to raise all your budget that way. But I kind of use it, you know, almost as a Trojan horse to say, well, all right, well, here's my little 30-day campaign. But by the way, if you also are interested in equity investing, here's, you know, here's the link to the business plan. If you're interested in donating, getting a tax deductible donation through our fiscal sponsor, all right, here's the link to Film Collaborative, you know, and that's kind of how I look at, you know, the how and why you launch with a crowdfunding campaign. And so I've used Kickstarter a couple times. I've used Seed and Spark, and I think, and even before there was official crowdfunding, I looking back at my first few films, I'm like, yeah, we were doing that too. We just didn't call it that, you know. So
I
you
feel
know,
like,
'cause I always use the example, like, you know, you get your old bass player buddy Dave from college who gives you $40, but then Dave puts your pitch video on his Instagram feed, and his Silicon Valley brother-in-law, who you've never met before, says, hey, that's cool, I'll give you $10,000, you know.
yeah.
So it's not really about the money you're making on Kickstarter, it's about the now 300 tentacles of connections that you're making.
And so in our last 90 seconds,
Oh,
to stay on topic, but I feel like I feel like we can, but I have to mention like you are a co-founder of Slamdance.
yeah.
How much of this has changed? Uh, has this always what you're doing now always been a part of the process of independent filmmaking? It's just now different. Now it's social media, Instagram and Kickstarter, and back then it was just different tools.
Well, MySpace and Friendster and
Right. Is that was
meeting
that
people at the
has it always been the same?
yeah, it's always been the same. And you know, and look, I've talked to people that have worked in film literally 90 years ago, it's always been the same, and it's always been an uphill battle, and everyone always says, oh, indie film's the worst it's ever been. No, it's always been the worst it's ever been. And people have always, back in the studio system, you know, on the weekends they would grab a camera and make a little their own little B movie. Like, indie film has been around a lot longer than anyone ever gives it credit for, and it will keep going. So keep on doing what you're doing, everyone, because you're part of a very long and wonderful tradition, you know, in filmmaking.
It's a nice dash of optimism that we don't
Oh
hear too much right now.
no, 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 everything's fine because it can't get any worse. So everything's gonna be fine.
Well, that's the perfect note to end on for the last. There it is. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, Avi.
Pleasure
Good luck,
talking to you.
everyone. And Atomic Fondue. Go
Yes.
to Atomic Fondue everywhere you can find it
Well,
on the internet.
I'll put the link for the campaign when we post this. And I can't wait to see it.
Thank you. Me too.
See you, Dan.